G'day, Professor Joseph Drew coming to you with another exciting installment of local government economics. But this video is actually really important, probably the most important one to watch all the way through because I'm hearing lots of different stories about what the amalgamation was supposed to achieve and what the amalgamation really did achieve. In this video, I lay out the proper, grown-up, robust empirical evidence which will set matters straight. So many of you recall the amalgamation debates that happened in 2015. The amalgamations were finally executed in 2016. They were based heavily on the work of KPMG, and you can get a copy of the assumptions for their modeling and read it for yourself. And what you'll find is that they were exactly that, assumptions. They said, we will assume that we will save such and such. No evidence at all, which is a little bit concerning because it was $1 billion reform. And it's also a little bit disappointing because there was already a whole heap of robust, scholarly, peer-reviewed work done on the Queensland amalgamations, which happened in 2007 and 8. So there was no need to guess and giggle, but that, it seems, is what KPMG did. They certainly didn't present any evidence to tell us why matters might be different. Also featuring heavily in this amalgamation debate was the work of the Independent Local Government Review Panel, which was supposed to look at evidence-based prescriptions for improving financial sustainability of local government. It was headed up by Mr. Sampson, and unfortunately there was very little evidence in there. What was there was not robust, and a lot of it was critiqued in the empirical literature, in the scholarly literature, and shown to be badly flawed. So, Premier Baird and Minister Till at the time took on board this flawed evidence of KPMG and the Independent Local Government Review Panel and prosecuted and pushed forward sometimes against considerable community resistance, a program of forced amalgamations. Now, as an academic, I confess it was very disappointing to see my state government behave in this way, to base really important decisions for a very expensive reform on guesswork, when I knew for a fact that there were at least 8 A-ranked peer-reviewed papers out in the scholarly literature which were showing exactly the opposite. They were basically suggesting that if we proceeded with these amalgamations, it would end very badly. Now, to understand why this concerned me and disappointed me so much, you need to understand how scholarly academic work gets accepted in journals. So first of all, you need to know these rankings of journals. We have A-ranked journals, best in the world, then B, then C. These papers are all published in A-ranked journals. And this is a ranking system devised by our own federal government, so they're telling us these are the best journals in the world. Second thing you need to know is, to get a paper published, you just don't write one, send it in and say, hey, I'm an awesome person, wouldn't you like to publish this paper? We have to go through what's called a peer-reviewed process. So first of all, the desk editor reads it, decide whether it's worth sending out to review or not. If they decide it is worth sending out to review, they will send it to at least 2, usually 3, experts in the field, generally people who have also published in this highly ranked peer-reviewed journal, and they will test the work. They will make sure the theory is correct. They will test the mathematics and make sure that the work is correct and that there's no reason to doubt it. So for a paper to get accepted, indeed for 8 papers to get accepted, casting significant doubt on this $1 billion reform, you would have thought that any state government would pause and think, I've got guesswork, and they're telling me it's guesswork on one side by commercial consultants and independent panels, and on the other side I have peer-reviewed work which is telling me the opposite, that's gone through this rigorous process. Which one should I follow? Well, as you know, they decided to follow the guess and giggle work. But not to be deterred, following the amalgamations, I also did a number of peer-reviewed empirical papers, and that's what we're mostly here to talk about today. The results of these papers. They were all also published in A-ranked journals. In fact, the one that you see in front of you is widely considered to be the best journal of its kind in the world. So these papers use something called difference and difference regression. Now, I'm what's called an econometrician. I do the super complicated maths that no one else in the world wants to do, which explains why I work for 4 universities overseas. And I must be okay at it because I've got over 80 peer-reviewed works in this, attesting to my capacity to do it properly. So econometrics is really a super complicated version of that y equals mx plus c that you learned back in early high school, where you can establish a formula for a relationship and then you can use the formula to predict values. What we're doing in this difference and difference regression is we're comparing the councils that weren't amalgamated, the green line here on the screen, with the councils that were amalgamated, the red line here on the screen. And what we're really interested in is what happens after a certain period of time, what we call the treatment, which was the amalgamations in 2016. And what we seek to do is we look at the group that weren't amalgamated and we use the trend in their performance to posit our counterfactual of what we would have expected in the amalgamation group had they not been amalgamated. We then put all the variables into the equation and just isolate the specific effect of the amalgamation, controlling for anything else that could conceivably alter expenditure profiles. And we can then work out what's called the treatment effect, how much the intervention did or did not change the performance of that group of councils. So that's a really abridged version of how difference and difference regression works. Of course, if you want the full details for these things, look up the copy of the paper. They're all available publicly, like all my work is. You can purchase a copy from the journal. Some of them are free, and you can read in detail the mathematics that underlies this. But they have no doubt this is a well-attested empirical strategy that's been proved countless times to be completely accurate. And what did we find? Well, I've actually done 3 of these papers. The first one with different co-authors, incidentally. The first one looked at things 3 full years after the amalgamation. Now, why did I do that? Well, if you go back to the information that was put out at the time of the forced amalgamation, we were told that within 3 years we will have completely paid back our costs of amalgamation and these savings would be evident. So I took them at their word and tested things 3 years after the amalgamations. And what did I find? I found that the treatment effect for the amalgamation increased costs on average by 11.2%. I'll say it a different way. Just isolating for everything else that could conceivably have affected costs, when we isolate for the amalgamations, we find that on average, amalgamated council costs went up by 11.2%. Remember they were supposed to save us billions of dollars, these amalgamations? Well, they didn't. And that's what my sophisticated empirical work before the amalgamation said would happen. So I wasn't surprised when these findings came out after the amalgamation. Interestingly, in that particular paper, that first one you can see in the first column there, we also tested the staff costs. And what we found is that they didn't go down at all. They went up. Why would they go up? Well, typically in an amalgamation, after the amalgamation, managers have larger budgets, more staff reporting to them, so they get paid more. We end up having a whole new layer of middle management because they need to coordinate between the senior, more corporate management and the less senior staff. And also you lose a lot of transparency when you increase your workforce significantly. And if you've ever worked in a small company and a big company, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So not to be deterred, we then looked at another paper and looked at things 4 full years after amalgamation, hoping that things might have improved. And what did we find? Once again, we find that the cost did not go down. What actually happened was the complete opposite. They went up on average 11%. You notice these numbers are moving around a little bit. That's not surprising. Year on year, budgets do bounce around a little bit, but they're pretty consistent. There's not much difference in terms of a huge local government budget between 11.2 and 11%. This is on average, remember. Some councils would have done better. Some councils would have done worse. But on average, just the mere act of amalgamating increased the cost for local government in the order of around 11%. We then did a third paper, and that's the one I showed you a copy of before, published in what's widely regarded as the best journal in the world. With looking at, in this paper, 5 full financial years afterwards, and we find once again that costs went up on average by 11.1%. Now, that statistical significance for all three of these results is the 1% level. That's the highest level of statistical certainty you can get. You can literally bank your house on these results. So this is important because if you're appraising the performance of an amalgamated council, such as Federation Council, you need to be conscious of the fact that we know beyond a shadow of a doubt, no reasonable person could dispute the fact that amalgamation increased costs in the order of 11% on average. Your council may have done slightly better, slightly worse, but on average, costs went up 11%. You'll recall that rates were frozen for 4 years. They couldn't go up. You may also recall from my other videos that rates usually represent about a third of your revenue. So if your costs are going to go up by 11%, to recoup those extra costs through rates, you would have to put your rates up by about 33%. Of course, if you can't do anything for 4 years, that compounds that gap between the revenue you need and the expenditure you're spending. And what it means is that when you get to actually finally put up the rates, they will have gone up significantly. And that's what we find all across the state. If you look at the IPART SRV website, you'll see lots of examples of amalgamated councils that put up their rates by 53%, Cootamundra Gundagai, by 60 odd percent, Snowy Monaro, by 60 odd percent, in Armidale. It's quite a common thing. Now, if your costs go up, a few things are possible. If you don't put up your revenue, in all likelihood, you're going to have a financial crash. It's not going to end well. The council's going to find itself in severe difficulty and may even be put under administration, as happened at Central Coast Council. There was some complications there, but you can link everything that happened to them back to the amalgamation. That's quite straightforward, logical exercise. The other alternatives, what I told you, lots of councils have actually put their rates up, and they've put their fees up and their charges up, but because they weren't allowed to do it for 4 years, they've gone up a lot more than 11%, and because rates is usually about only a third of your income, they've had to go up a lot more than 11%. So they're the two big outcomes that are likely, given what we know actually beyond a shadow of a doubt occurred with these amalgamations. And that worries me and it disappoints me. It disappoints me because it was completely avoidable. I tried to warn the state government of this. I published the papers. They were publicly available. I even offered to spend some time with the Premier and the Minister and go through the papers and explain why it wasn't going to work. But instead we preferred to pay hundreds and hundreds of thousands to commercial consultants to do guess and giggle. We based our decision making on that and it didn't end well. So there's a lesson there about using commercial consultants. A lot of people forget commercial consultants are there to make money. They don't have to stand behind the work that they do. And indeed, you usually don't know the person who did the work or the qualifications of that person. I'm sure the people from KPMG did not come out to Federation Council and introduce themselves to you and take your questions and present the evidence in person. In fact, I'm sure we still don't know who exactly those people were. Now, the second thing, what worries me, is that who is paying for this disastrous decision? The decision was made in most instances by the New South Wales state government at the time. Now, often people were against the decision. I know the people in Urena, for instance, were very against the idea of amalgamating. Now, it seems quite strange to me, and contrary to the principles of natural justice, that the victim who fought against amalgamation, would then get to bear the cost of amalgamation. So that's why I'm quite worried by these findings. Look, I hope this video has clarified some misconceptions that are around in the community about the amalgamations. It's not just your council. Right across the state, on average, costs went up 11%. In the public forums, I'll tell you precisely what happened for your particular council. But hopefully now you'll see that performance has been a problem in most amalgamated councils. It doesn't mean that we can't do better. It doesn't mean that we can't find better ways to move forward in the future, but we can't ignore what has happened in the past and the effect that it's having on the conversations and the tough decisions that we need to make right now. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.